Hello and welcome to Rights and Recourse, a program that educates you about your rights and recourse to those violated. My name is Dumila Matez. A defining feature of the South African labour market is the disparity in access and quality employment. Apartheid education and labour policies produce a strong racial gradient in unemployment, employment and wage rates. The ANC government has been addressing this legacy, disadvantage and injustice through job creation programs, progressive legislation and legal reform. The Employment Equity Act of 1998 is an example, obliging employers to implement affirmative action measures to ensure equal representation of designated groups, black people, women and people with disabilities. However, in the last 16 years since the Act was implemented, there has been disappointment, disillusionment and frustration about the slow pace of transformation. The Constitutional Court landmark ruling during the last week in the case of Ms Renate Barnard versus the National Police Commissioner has put the issue on its head. And today, on Rights and Recourse, we are discussing the Employment Equity Act with a strong emphasis on affirmative action. To discuss this issue are Mr. Jimmy Manyi, President of the Progressive Professional Forum, Labour Analyst Mr. Terry Bell from our Cape Town studios, and from our Pretoria studios, Mr. Themba Dlamini, Managing Director of the Black Management Forum. Gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Good afternoon.
But first, let's take a look at this insert. Well, we seem to have gremlins in our systems here. We'll bring you that insert as we go along. But first, let me ask our guests, and if you'd like to join us in today's discussion, please call us on 011 714 5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Rights and Recourse. Mr. Manyi, the introduction that we've made, is it a true reflection of how we find the situation with regard to employment equity?
Yes, indeed, and I think indeed that landmark judgment, as you referred to, is a very important judgment, because there's been this debate about the numerical targets, whether these numerical targets are actually constitutional or not. Now this matter has been laid to rest. We now know that the numerical targets are constitutional, and therefore the issue that Solidarity, AfriForum, DA, and all others have been fighting about these targets, we know now that their fight has been out of order. We now have to implement these numerical goals so that we can track the progress we're making on transformation. So indeed, I think it's a very important landmark that should have made headlines, which unfortunately it did not.
Terry, you wrote this morning in the City Press about this issue. Can you give us a background of your article on this issue?
Well, yes, because the thing is that this, I agree, it's a very important decision, but it's a decision that should have been there in the first place. I didn't see it as a major landmark. I thought it existed anyhow. Of course, you have to have numerical numbers, or you have to have the demographics of the country represented. But what that decision also says of the Constitutional Court is that efficiency, etc., should not be compromised. Where we should be criticizing and be looking at it in the last 16 years is that government has not done enough to bridge that incredible damage that was done by apartheid with the lack of skills, the lack of education. We went through 40 years of the most horrendous social engineering ever. And suddenly in 1994 comes and everyone says level playing field. Complete nonsense. It's going to take a long time. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that affirmative action is necessary, is vital, and this whole business that the DA goes on about, certain AfriForum, which is really just an ethnic nationalism, talking about an Afrikaner nation and trying to protect interests of a narrow group, that is wrong. We've got to look at it and say we have to actually overcome what happened in the past, and the sooner the better, but there are reasons that we are not moving very rapidly, and one of those reasons is that we've had inadequate adult basic education and training, inadequate early education, inadequate education right across the board. We still have private education, which is still predominantly among the majority of whites, and the township and rural schools are by and large a mess.
Mr. Themba Dlamini up in Pretoria, the BMF has fought against in this space for a long time. And what is the BMF's view about this landmark judgment?
Look, from our perspective, the landmark is not an issue that we can be excited about, because we believe that the foundation that the BMF has laid is quite solid. What is required from the different stakeholders is that they have to just comply with the provision of the law. You will recall that this particular act or piece of legislation was crafted by stakeholders through the NETLEC system. So you had government, you had business, you had labor, and the community who came together and said there is an imbalance that was caused by the previous regime. Therefore, let's have this piece of legislation to correct the imbalances of the past. So the landmark case is not really an issue for us. All we are appealing to is to say to corporate South Africa that the time has come when the engagement with labor and all the social parties is critical to close the gap. The sooner we do it, the better.
Mr. Manyi, what does the Employment Equity Act mean for an ordinary South African?
I think the Act for an ordinary South African is an act that is there to bring about justice and to bring about equity and to bring about fairness. It's an act that is trying to make sure that national cohesion that the country is looking for happens. We cannot continue to have a situation in this country that white people continue to dominate the top echelons of society. So for this act is very important. That's why I'm slightly disappointed that the BMF is not excited about this ruling. I'm really disappointed because this ruling provides certainty, because the issue of correcting the numbers has been challenged all the time. So when you have the highest constitutional court the highest court in the land affirming the law, everybody should be excited because the law could have been wrong. But now we know that the law is correct. So we at the Progressive Professional Fund were very excited that there is certainty that what the law seeks to achieve is actually constitutional. I think it's important for corporate South Africa to take advantage of this and stop playing games. If you look at one of the judges when they were making this ruling, especially Van der Westhuizen, when this judge was providing concurrence judgment on this, one of the things that he spoke about is that despite the fact that we could argue human dignity for Barnard, we could argue service delivery, but the bigger picture of what the country needs to achieve is far more important. So I think South Africa, sooner or later, must really come to understanding that with employment equity, the country can only move forward, and this is social justice, and it will ensure that there are no upheavals in the country, because in fact, as I sit down, very quickly, this employment equity has actually generated a lot of black middle class. The same black middle class that has ensured that there's a huge expenditure at all levels. There's some 300 odd billion that the black middle class produced by this piece of legislation that have come about. So therefore it makes economic sense. It is in the national interest that this law must be promoted.
Well, if you'd like to join us on today's discussion, please call us on 011 714 5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Rights and Recourse. We'll be back after the break.
Zoom into Africa. This is Madagascar. The president is Mr. Heri Rajaonarimampianina. Madagascar got independent from France on 26 June in 1960. The population is more than 21 million people. One of the major languages spoken is French. Monetary unit is Ariari.
SABC News delivers stories that
unify the nation
in many ways, stories that inspire us
to see the world differently, appreciate
and celebrate our diversity. And mostly, they make this place a better country to live in despite our color, beliefs or culture.
I
am
Mahendra Raghunath.
Tabile Ngwadu, Lulu Gabu.
Join us every day
As we provide updates on
local and international news
straight into your home.
we
We are
SABC News.
Welcome back. And if I hear you clearly, gentlemen, you are all saying, does it imply? It does imply, for me, as you say, that employment equity should be an equitable spread of each race group and employment and gender and people with disability across the workplace.
Yeah. In fact, which
The
should
object, yes.
dispel the myth that affirmative action is only for black people. Affirmative action, in fact, is for everyone, blacks and whites. It affirms white women. In fact, there is a section 15, section 15, subsection 4, which also makes it a crime to bar white males forever, as it was. So it cannot create absolute barriers. So this law is actually a very accommodative law. It's a very positive legislation to make sure that everybody participates. The challenge that we have in this country is a challenge where black people are marginalized, and the inclusion of black people into the economy, the focus on race is seen as being racist, when in fact it actually is an attempt to reverse the racism. We have a very racist dispensation as things stand, so affirmative action is an act to make sure that that racist dispensation is reversed. So it should really be supported.
Terry, you wanted to say something, and you actually were beaten by Mr. Manye to the point.
Indeed, yes. Look, you have to have numeric and demographic balance. Obviously, that has to be the aim. It has to be the goal. Now, what we have carried into our new dispensation, we never had level playing fields. You couldn't have after what we suffered under apartheid and the deliberate distortion of the majority of the population and the divisions that were put in between those classified Asiatic, colored, blank, whatever, Bantu, I think was the last term, or was it native before? That sort of thing. We carried that forward into the new dispensation. What we also carried forward, and unfortunately I think that we are seeing residues of this with the old solidarity, in many ways is quite a good, efficient trade union, but it carries with it the whole heritage, the legacy of the old Mijnwerkers Unie, workers of the world unite for a white South Africa. And unfortunately, that has also been brought into the new dispensation. So you have elements of racism as well, which have to be counteracted. At the same time, and why I didn't say a great landmark rule, Jimmy Manye is wrong about that. I thought it was a good judgment, but I wasn't that excited because I thought it was a red herring to say that the Equity Act was out of order, wanting to have a demographic balance, a national demographic balance. I always considered it to be so. I think the Employment Equity Act is perfectly reasonable. One of the problems, of course, is that once again, and with so much of our labour legislation, is the lack of enforcement.
Mr. Temba Dlamini in Pretoria, we well know the battles fought by the BMF. And are we still fighting those battles, or have we taken the eye off the ball?
No, look, we are still fighting those battles, and I'm glad my colleague in Cape Town came to my defense to talk about why I'm saying I am not excited about this particular court ruling, because it is quite clear that we applaud the ruling, and it's basically saying to us that it's actually reinforcing the fact that employment equity is imperative across all spheres of government and even in the private sector. So we are still playing in that space. I think what we need to also be aware of is that let's look at the latest report from the Employment Equity Commission. I mean, it is really pathetic to, 20 years down the line, you still find that nothing has moved. If there's any significant movement, it's very small. It's so small to an extent that it's not even having an impact or a dent on the entire employment equity system. So all I'm trying to say is that the private sector, well, let's take mining or the 5 high impact sectors in the country. And then just ask yourself, why is it that there's such a snail's gallop in terms of making sure that you have black people also occupying those positions where they can be decision makers instead of being relegated to.
Mr. Dlamini, my apologies. I just want to come in before we forget the spot. We're sitting here with the former chairman of the Employment Equity Commission, who himself was fighting those figures when he was chairman.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
In fact, I think it's so important, those figures, that had this judgment gone the other way, maybe Mr. Dlamini and Mr. Bell would understand what I'm talking about, because this court, this judgment could have gone the other way. But the important thing, just to move the discussion forward, the important thing is that the amendments that have been introduced by the minister have been very useful. They do a number of things. Firstly, they remove the cumbersomeness in the law, because one of the problems with this law has been the law itself was too cumbersome. A DG could not easily effect the government power. But today, with the current changes that have been made, if there's no compliance, a company can be taken straight to the labor court, which is very positive. If there's no compliance, a company today can be fined, and that fine is now linked to turnover, which is much more steep than your normal 900,000, as it were. And indeed, the labor inspectors have got much more flexibility now to do a lot of things that they couldn't do before. One of the big challenges as well has been the issue of the capacity of the department, which is still a perennial issue. The labor inspectors, the issue there is the quantity. We don't have enough labor inspectors to go around the country, firstly. Secondly, the quality of the inspectors. We need to have the kind of inspectors that are proficient. Somebody that goes and supervises construction must know something about civil engineering, as it were. Somebody that supervises banks must know something about financial services. If you don't know that, we are in trouble. So we need to professionalize those labor inspectors.
In other words, trying to avoid black people being put into position, and they're put in human resources and public relations.
Well, that's another aspect of the law, by the way, that the Employment Equity also tries to manage, to say that indeed, although that part, in terms of removing cumbersomeness, the previous form in the Employment Equity Act compliance form used to say not only must you track levels, but you must also track categories, because companies had decided that, okay, now that we must put these black people on these positions, let's put them on so-called soft areas. It's a pity now that that has been removed. So there's a chance now that we can actually revert to that. But I think the other important thing is the issue of the corporate sector resistance. I honestly would be saying JSE. Why is it that the JSE is not compelling companies to comply? That part of the requirements to be company listed in the JSE, you must show that the Department of Labor is happy with you. So I really think that if JSE can do that, we can make a lot of progress.
You know that JSE can make this a governance issue.
It can make it a governance issue, because in fact, Mr. Mateza, there's a section in the Employment Equity Act, Section 54, that if that section had to be promulgated, that section empowers the government to stop a tender, to continue doing a particular tender has been doing with the private sector if you are found to be in breach with the law. That particular section hasn't been promulgated, and I think it's still an ace up the sleeve of the department, and I think private sector must know this, that if they continue to play games, there is still another leverage that the department can unleash. So they must not allow that to happen. They must comply.
Terry, you earlier you spoke about the main workers' union. You reminded me that it is this union that went on strike in 1922 because black people were being employed in the mines and were given posh, somewhat then called posh positions.
Yes, well, that's the same thing, and those sort of attitudes do persist well into the future. What I'm really interested in is I think Jimmy Manye actually justified what I was saying when he talked about the labor, not having enough labor inspectors, but not enough trained labor inspectors. This is where we have fallen down. We, in the last 20 years, have not given enough opportunity to, on the educational front particularly. How many black CAs do we have? How many black chartered secretaries do we have? How many people have been given the skills and the opportunity? We should have devoted an enormous amount of resources, not to just throwing it at schooling generally, but towards affirmative action within the educational environment. And then we would have been more advanced than we are now. Yes, Mr. Manye is perfectly correct that you're going to have resistance again, and that's people who've been sitting very comfortably, and business got off the hook completely on the TRC, for example, never had to pay compensation, although Archbishop Desmond Tutu suggested it as a good idea, and I still think it was. And that money could have been then used again to reskill people. We have a generation, 2 generations of people who suffered educationally. At the same time, you had people who were given an inflated opinion of themselves on an ethnic, on a racist basis. And this is carried through. Those attitudes have to be changed. And the way we change them is through one of the ways you do it is through affirmative action.
Mr. Dlamini, I just want to come back to an issue with the BMF. Should the BMF, which is a beacon light of hope in the history of black managers in South Africa, also add another role that they could play, the one of mentorship to the youngsters who are coming up?
Look, the BMF is already playing in that particular space. As you will know that we are pro-development. So we look at managerial capabilities. We also look at also creating a cadre of thought leaders in our space, especially for the members. But apart from those particular programs that the BMF is actually promoting, I wanted to touch on the issue of penalties that Jimmy has alluded to say that, you know, the penalties are just one way of actually trying to enforce or trying to make the corporate sector to comply with the Employment Equity Act. But that's not enough, because penalties, some corporate or some companies will be able to afford that particular penalty, and they can still get away with non-compliance. Well, you need a different regime to look at what else is required apart from financial penalties. I'll give you an example. The government has set up the sector education and training authorities, and those authorities were set up to close this gap that Terry Bell is making reference to about skill shortages and all that. Now, what has happened, there was a levy also attached to that particular scheme. What you get from the sector skills plan is not those competencies that the corporate world is arguing that there's rare skills and so forth. They are not actually paying attention to those particular skills, especially within their skills plan. Now, their system hasn't worked. What we need a different regime that can make both corporate and government to say that having come up with this particular system whereby the corporate world has not come to the party, then what else do we need to make sure that the corporate come to the party? For an example, it should be the duty of any CEO to make it his or her business that the workforce that actually contribute to the bottom line of his or her company are developed to the level that he is able to say that when he or she exits the system, somebody who has been disadvantaged replaces him or her. So you need that kind of decision. Instead of reducing the employment equity to a human resource management portfolio. We have seen it that system doesn't work. You need another intervention. Now, talking about the inspectors within the Labor Department, I know those are challenges, but you need to drill down into these reports. For an example, are we asking those questions to say that why is it that in certain companies there is a trend of people saying that have complied, but you only have a particular grouping that has been elevated? Remember, the employment equity defined blacks as including Africans, Indians, and colors, and women and people with disabilities. Now, why is it that year in, year out, you find that the same grouping get preferential treatment? So the Department of Labor must look down and sit and look at those particular reports and say, well, maybe you need a different system instead of just ticking the box. Because currently, you have a ticking box exercise, but again, 20 years down the line, we haven't moved.
Well, I'd like to see whether, Mr. Jimiman, you would respond to some of the things you raised. If you'd like to join us on today's discussion, please call us on 011 714 5497 or 5498 or tweet us at Rights and Recourse. I'd also like to say we did invite Solidarity to be part of this discussion, but they declined. We'll be back after the break.
Your World provides trusted world, continent, and local stories. We deliver breaking news from across the globe and information on the latest top stories on business, technology, politics, and sport. Analysis of the big global business and economic issues as they affect consumers and investors. Make sure you don't miss Your World, weekdays between 11 and 12 midnight. We keep the nation fully informed.
I once saw a flower blossom through 27 prison bars of yesterday's unjust flames. I felt an old woman's anticipation for the country's first open elections. And I heard the loud celebrations of that flower's historic inauguration. I was there when Unity sang of how the Springbok never held anything back, and we saw a first-time band of 11 men, Chibobo possibility throughout the land. At the foot of Africa, time remembers how truth can reconcile a people. We carved our name into space, and on the world stage, our art stood united. When we blow that vuvuzela, the whole world goes into a trance. And even in that tearful hour of the flower's separation, we are a people who see the music and hear the flowers dance. SABC, sharing 20 years of inspiration.
Welcome back to Rights and Recourse. We've got a call on the line. I know Mr. Manyi is burning to respond to some of the issues raised by Mr. Dlamini. But first of all, let's take this call on Dr. Mthembu. Dr. Mthembu, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Yes, good afternoon, sir. How are you doing, guys?
Oh, thank you. What's your question?
My question is, I don't know whether this, you talk about correcting the imbalances of the past, whether it's referring to only, I'm sorry if I'm a bit naive or rude, to colors only, because we've seen in the sport that we've seen that said they're promoting black people. You only find out, you only see the colors, especially rugby and cricket. We know that there are some people from the Eastern Cape, especially the black people, have been playing rugby more than 100 years, but those people are overlooked. Also in the farming industry, we know that in that industry is predominant of the white people. How do you correct the imbalances? Perhaps maybe my father was working there for more than 100 years. The owner of the farm was born there when my father was working there. If perhaps I would say that they can say to me, I want, if they give a piece of land to me that I've been there for 50 years, I suppose something rather than say, I mean, this compensation buying, willing to buy, willing to sell is not working. We don't want to do like other countries, neighboring countries like Zimbabwe, to enforce them. I think those are issues I think at the moment we should tackle, especially in the sport, rugby and cricket, and also in the farming industry. What we have seen also in Marikana.
Mr. Mthembu, we've got the gist of your question. We got the gist of your discussion, of your topic, of your discussion. Mr. Mthembu, thank you very much for your call. Mr. Mthembu actually has brought in something I spoke to you offline about sport and transformation. And is there something sport can learn from the Employment Equity Act?
Yeah, indeed, and I think the Minister of Sport is quite enthusiastic and he has understood what employment equity is trying to do and is actually implementing it. He has begun to talk the same language as the Minister of Labour. So I think the sporting people are in good hands in terms of transformation. But I need to differ with my fellow panelists on two issues. Firstly, I think they raise stale arguments, both of them. The one argument raised by Mr. Dlamini, which is quite stale, is the issue that these fines people can afford. The reason we have moved from an absolute number to a turnover linkage is to deal with that. You can't tell me that 10% of turnover is a small change. A company that is turning over R1 billion to be fined 10% of that can't be small change at any measure of imagination, firstly. Secondly, on the issue of people not educated and all that raised by Mr. Bell, again, this is another stale argument. We're sitting here as we speak here today with a whole lot of unemployed graduates. So the issue of educated people has never been an issue, continues not to be an issue. The issue is the culture in those organizations, which is not welcoming. People go there with all these, by the way, black people and qualifications is not a new phenomenon. Even way back in the 80s, Dr. Gordon Sibia was a nuclear physicist. He couldn't get a job. So the issue of qualifications has never been an issue. It's just been a very elegant excuse to exclude black people. Today, black people, I mean, as we speak right now, if you say to me, I've got CVs as I speak right now of people with BCom, honors, all kinds of degrees that are without employment. So the issue is we need to make sure that corporate South Africa accepts black people as equals. This is the problem. Black people cannot continue to be proxy for incompetence, which is what is the issue now. So the fundamental paradigm shift within the employer's psyche is really what is delaying transformation.
Terry, down in Cape Town, one of the problems we have been talking about here, we've been dwelling a great deal on employment equity. What then is affirmative action, and how different is it from employment equity?
The employment equity is something that you aim at. This is the aim, the object, to have a proper balance within society where every opportunity is given to everyone on an equal basis, where you truly have an egalitarian society within this hierarchy. Of course, I don't necessarily go along with that being a good trade unionist and a socialist, but it gives everyone an equal opportunity, which we couldn't have. We have to rectify. That's what the aim is of employment equity, and affirmative action is how we get there. Now, one of our problems today is, yes, we have the corporate culture as well. We also have a lot of unemployed graduates who've been given the wrong sort of training as well. I'm sure that Mr. Manye will agree with that we have far too many people who are not given the sorts of skills that corporate South Africa necessarily demands. Sometimes there are, but there is a major problem here too. And this is what has happened here is we came into this situation of trying to rectify these incredible ills of the past at a time when the global economy was moving into crisis. It's an ongoing economic crisis. The bottom lines are being pinched. We're having greater mechanization, automation, etc. So that again puts in another factor to this thing which makes life much more difficult, and also therefore makes the people in the corporates with their attitude saying, well, we're going to keep to ourselves. You end up then with this narrow ethnicity, this narrow ethnic nationalism being given a bit of a boost because of that. And I think that we have to be aware of as well.
Terry, I just wanted, not interrupting you there. We've got a caller from Johannesburg who'd like to remain anonymous. Anonymous, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Good afternoon.
What is your question?
My question is one. I agree with Jimmy Manye and what he's saying about exclusive of the black in the economic sector and hiding behind the thumb by saying our blacks are uneducated. Do you think as perceived is a propaganda that's been used from corporate using this thing as they don't want to employ our black? Because there are so many, as Jimmy Manye says, I'm agreeing 100%. If our government cannot take the stand and do this thing, it's back of corruption because they corrupt our people. Now you look at these things of happening like these of unemployment, the crime. It also perpetuates the crime where people they cannot do anything. That's why they end up going to doing these things of drug dealers, because it's excessive. Every street you go, Johannesburg, Durban, everywhere. This thing must be rooted. I agree, Jimmy Manye, and I congratulate you, comrade. Take this head off and do the right thing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anonymous. Thank you very much. We got the gist of what you wanted to say there. Mr. Jimmy Manyi and Mr. Dlamini, the two of you can share this question. Could we have gone around this issue of affirmative action and employment equity the other way around, like the National Party did? They went about it the crudest way in 1948 by just removing people and putting people of their own.
Two things. Firstly, let's just kill the issue of people that have got the wrong qualification. It's another excuse. If you look at, give a live example. If you look at Bobby Gottsel has a BA in something. His BA, with his BA, he was able to run a gold mining company. That is a humanities qualification, but was able to run a mining company. It did it very well, by the way. I have no issues with that. Now, the same opportunity is not granted to black people. When it's black people, all kinds of excuses come. That no, this qualification is not fitted for this. Everybody just tries to fine-tune, just to find a reason to exclude you. So we are very skeptical as Progressive Professionals Forum of this wrong qualification. If you go to England, for instance, same thing happens. In England, people they're not as mechanical as Mr. Bell is trying to imply as it were here. When you have a degree, that should mean that we've got a cognitive capabilities. We've got a brain that can deal with complex matters. That has been measured and all of this. So clearly, a person with that kind of training should be able to be moved into various areas. So I think people must stop this excuse of saying it's a wrong qualification and so on. But then to move forward,
if they're properly mentored.
I think it is important for all of us to appreciate that the fundamental difference between this democracy and apartheid is consultation. This government is consultative and all that. I think it's an important thing to do. But I think once we've consulted enough and things have been signed, we must implement. I would really encourage the African National Congress government that has got the mandate. It must not abuse its mandate. It must use its mandate to govern. We gave it the 62% and we want to see results.
Mr. Dlamini, you wanted to come in there?
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to touch on the several issues. One is the caller who was talking about transformation within the sports arena. And just to sort of like concur with Jimmy to say that, yes, the Minister of Sports and Recreation has started the process. He's actually interacting with a number of stakeholders in different fields, rugby, cricket, and so forth. In fact, he has also shared with us that he would like to meet with the BMF and just share his views so that we can be able to complement the work that he has done. So there is some movement on that in as far as government intervention is concerned. Well, the second part is that government has got other programs. I mean, when you talk about the issue related to land, there are programs that government has initiated in terms of addressing the transformation with respect to the land issue. So we can't just sit back and say, well, government is not doing anything. There are programs. It's just a question of looking at the outcome of those particular programs. I want to come back to the issue of skills development, that the Skills Development Act and the Skills Levies Act was a platform created to complement the Employment Equity Act. In other words, the corporate cannot come with an excuse to say that, the people that are being trained are not meant for the sector. It is contradictory because the very same corporate sector is the one with the organized labor who craft the sector skills plan. And in the sector skills plan, which is their blueprint, in that particular document, they identify the skills that they require. So it cannot be the argument saying, what Terry is saying, that no, people have been trained for wrong, they have been trained, but those skills that are required by the sectors are not servicing the sectors. Where is the role? So it's contradictory to make that kind of statement. So the sector skills plan or the skills development has been there, but again, the corporate world has always sort of like shied away and come up with all sort of arguments to say that, well, we cannot promote people into chartered accountant positions, whereas you have a pool of chartered accountants sitting within in an organization called ABASA. So let's not try to duck out of what the real issue is. The real issue is that at the corporate level, it is the executive echelon is still skewed to the wise. So we need to come to that realization and say, let's address those issues.
Terry, in this area of this issue of skills, quickly, in this issue of skills, in the old apartheid years, South Africa was awash with vocational institutions which trained thousands of Afrikaners. Why can't we do the same? And the second part of that question is, whose role should it be? Should it not be the private sector's role to pay for these skills institutions?
Yes, I think we bark up the wrong tree. I don't disagree at all. What I'm saying is we now have a situation of economic crisis globally. So bottom lines are being pinched. When you have a boom period and you have a minimum pool to draw from, which is what apartheid did, it said, right, just the white community. You could bring people in with, say, a humanities degree, and you could mentor them through the whole process, taking time to really train them. I know many graduates myself who are unemployed, and the reason they can't get employed because when they apply for a job, they're told you don't have the experience. The experience is not being offered. Yes, it is largely the corporate fault and the fault of, in many instances, just blatant racism. In other instances, it's saying, well, we haven't got the time, we haven't got the money, we don't have the resources to spend on this. Let's find someone who's already been given some mentoring, who comes up through, say, for example, a particular skill set with a family even. That happens. In terms of sport, and I'd like to draw that as an analogy. If you grow up in the Eastern Cape, well, the analogy with sport is because you can have people who are playing on a piece of rough ground without proper facilities. And that's largely the case still in the Eastern Cape, where, incidentally, with the South African Rugby Union in the Eastern and Western Cape was founded in 1898, before the Darnie Cravens Rugby Board. But if you're playing on that, and you go to a school, a private school with the best facilities, the best coaching all the way through, those people have the advantage. And we still have that set of advantages being given largely to one particular grouping within the society. I agree with that. It's a combination of the attitudes corporately and within sport as well, but also the lack of adequate mentoring and proper skills development. That's all I'm getting at.
Well, I'm glad that sport has been brought into this discussion, because sport is an employer, sport is a business, and surely they should also be governed by the Employment Equity Act.
Yeah, indeed. I think, let's talk about this issue of skills development and so on. That presupposes that black people generally have got no skills. And that's sometimes a fundamental mistake.
Mr. Mann, you'll get a first bite of the cherry. I just need to go to a break. Join us on today's discussion and call us on 011 714 5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Rights and Recourse. We'll be back after the break.
What is wrong with African players? Why are they not winning?
Our officials, they don't look at the bigger picture of players being happy before they go to the pitch, because mind game is very important.
Seek ye first the goals and playing the tactical strategy on the field of play, and all other things shall be added onto you. Don't put money before.
African coaches, did they do well?
I think so far they are doing well.
I do not agree. Sometimes local is lekker is dangerous, because I'm telling you, he who cut the road does not know that his back is zigzag.
Ghana proved to be a damp squib.
You cannot go to war with chickens. You go to war with your best commanders.
What will it take for Africa to make it at international level?
Bring professional coaches from anywhere, whether from Mars Moon, Jupiter to come and coach and get us the results. That's what we want. You can't be a coach simply because you play football. And Anam, do you have to be a drunkard in order to own a bottle store? No.
Watch Question Time with me, Mpho Tsedu, Monday to Thursday at 5:30 p.m. on the SABC News Channel.
Healthy food is not always the cheapest food option. And so making the healthy choices, the easier choices, remain a health challenge for South African children.
Bipolar disorder is said to affect 1 in 100 people.
Low back pain, the most common spinal disorder, affects about 8 out of 10 people at some point in their lives.
Back pain persists for more than a week or two. Seek advice.
I'm Dr. Cyril Madaou. Watch Health Talk every Saturday on SABC.
Welcome back. We did promise Mr. Jimmy Manyi that he'll have a first bite on the cherry, but unfortunately we have a caller from Cape Town. Bulelwa, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank you first for the program, and I wanted to raise one thing about black females and the fact that all females are grouped into one group and we are not divided as black and white, because for me I feel that if you look at the white females and colored females, if you compare them to the black females, we did not have the same opportunities in the past. And that has not been corrected. And even today, when we apply for positions in corporates, we get overlooked and the positions get given to our white counterparts. How is the Act, has it been changed to accommodate that, or will that be changed to accommodate that in future? Because for me, that is actually an unfair opportunities if you look at it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bulelwa. Mr. Jimmy Manyi, I think you should take that question together with the comments you wanted to make earlier. Okay. And also, you raised this very issue in your very first report as chairman of the Employment Equity Commission.
Yeah. Okay. Indeed.
You
want to make me unpopular now. Okay. Firstly, the point I really want to make here is that we need to disabuse ourselves of this notion that when you see a black person, you're seeing a candidate for skilling. We must disabuse ourselves of this notion. The main problem for black people is to be provided opportunities. Yes, the young ones that are just graduated, and that's not a black issue, it's all young people, black or white, that are just, those are the only people that are unskilled. There is this concept of recognition of prior learning, which people don't seem to want to take on board, which is very important, that you don't necessarily have to have a formal qualification. You can also have a lot of experience that must be taken on board when people need to employ you. So I really think we need to put that to bed. I really have a problem with every time you see a black person, it's a candidate for skilling. It can't be. We've got a lot of skilled black people. All we have is a recognition of their experience. And also it's important to also understand the horizontal approach to experience, that you may have experience on the one area, and that experience excuse me, can be transported and portable. It can go to the next area as well. So all of that must be put into the mix so that you don't have a situation where people are accused of no skills and so on. So having put that to bed, the issue of white women, I think if you look at the actual numbers right from beginning to now, you look at the number of women in the white women in particular, economic active population of women, is to look at what they are and look at their representation. They've hit their target and they've exceeded their target for a long time. That the Act has been in place. So indeed, this is exactly why in the Barnard case, in fact, this is peculiar, this is important for the Barnard case, that in this case, although she was qualified to get to the position, because of exactly this consideration, the National Commissioner could not proceed with the appointment, and the Constitutional Court is saying that is fair. This is exactly, then the queue must now, that's why this is so important, this judgment. It's so important. That's why we should all be excited about this judgment, because now it means we should now go back to the drawing board and look at the numeric targets. To what extent are these numeric targets assisting the big question of transforming society? A lot of African women in particular are not part of this. They are masked into this thing that women are there. And in fact, when you actually unpack the women, the big component of women that have made it, actually white women, as it were, the ones that are on the receiving end right now is the African women and the colored women. Those two groupings are really on the receiving end. And that's why the issue of these numerics is very important, that we must up the numerics in terms of the African and colored women.
Mr. Dlamini, do we as BMF look at the various areas of skilling in terms of management, in various businesses, advertising, media, and all of those? Do we look at the upskilling of I think Mr. Manyi will clap me here because I'm talking about upskilling of black people again.
Let me answer that question in two different ways. I first want to go back to the issue of mentorship. You asked the question as to the old regime. They had training schemes, and then the introduction of the Skills Development Act and the Skills Levies Act was to correct the old training schemes because they were geared for a particular group of society in the country or in the whole nation. So the introduction of the Skills Development Act was to deal with issues around how do you bring on board people that have been excluded from the main economic stream. Jimmy has made mention of recognition of prior learning. Companies are aware of those kind of programs, but companies have not taken advantage of that. The mentorship program, companies have been made aware of those programs through their skills plan, but they're still not taking advantage of it. Now you have the learnership program, which is also an intervention to say that if you're saying you want to upskill people, here's a platform to upskill people and then push them into the employment environment. So there are two phases. You have those, as Jimmy has said, that will probably need upskilling here and there. But you have those that already have experience and are well versed in their different competencies. And those are the people who have not been given the opportunity to go up the ranks. The issue of women, especially African women and the colored women, again, I'm saying there's a need for us to say that there must be something called fair discrimination. The case of Barnard is a clear indication that you require fair discrimination on the basis that you have already reached a threshold with respect to that particular category, and it's important that other categories within the women folk also be given that particular opportunity. So I wanted to respond to those two issues. The issue of what is the role of BMF in terms of the question that we have raised. Look, BMF does not necessarily play directly into those kind of aspects. But what the BMF does, the BMF, with its members, it creates an opportunity to say that if you have junior managers, middle management, and senior executive, if you know where they are and they want to be upskilled, you want to expose them to the corporate world by them participating in decision-making forums, such as an executive committee of a particular firm or a particular private company or the board. So the BMF is create that particular opportunity for those kind of individuals, but primarily for the members. So it's only the members of the BMF who will obviously have an opportunity to get into that kind of opportunity. So I think in that regard.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dlamini. We'll come back to that. When we come back, we will come back for last responses from the group. But let's see what are the tweets saying behind me here. Tamsang Namayekiso says, Section 20, subsection 3 should be thoroughly workshopped amongst employers. It is legally required to appoint without qualification about skills. And then you have another, somebody is talking to the president of the PPF saying, why is it that the JSE is not compelling? It's a statement that was made by Mr. Jimmy Manyi earlier about why somebody is tweeting on his behalf. That's interesting. And also, Mayeki, so Oh, it's the same thing. Those are the two words. But if you'd like to be part of this discussion, you have the last chance to call us as we are going to be wrapping up, and on 704-5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Rights and Recourse right through until tomorrow morning. We'll be back after the break.
Because of cancer, I realized life is short. I want to live my dream.
They can burn my face, but not my voice.
I'm definitely not a cross-dresser. South Africa, I'm just a gay man.
Join Puleng Molebatsi on Bupilong every Saturday at 17:30 CAT.
We really know the hype is about the new and how about the new cabinet will actually perform. But what role should then the media be playing at this critical stage?
I would hope that the media will give the newly appointed people a benefit of the doubt.
Has the media lost its respect in this regard? We want you to tell us.
Many factors that are hidden from the public in terms of this ought to be brought out by the media.
Watch Media Monitor with me, Alicia Jali, Sundays at 9 a.m. only on the SABC News Channel.
Well, welcome back as we are going to take final comments from the gentleman. We start with you, Terry, down in Cape Town.
Right, well, I'm sorry we concentrate mainly on the corporate area because I was talking about a number of other areas. For example, our teachers. We have very poorly qualified teachers. There's plenty of examples of that. We had to import welders to Madupe because we didn't have sufficient skilled welders. That's what I'm talking about. We also have many of our skilled people who have left. For example, more than 30,000 nurses, according to DENOSA, are now working abroad in the Gulf states, etc. Most of them are black too. So that is also a problem we need to deal with. And we haven't trained enough other nurses. We haven't trained sufficient welders. We stopped the apprenticeship program and the CETAs did not actually fill that gap. And that's what I'm also talking about.
Let me get a final comment from Mr. Dlamini.
From my side, I think 2 points I wanted to make. One is that you have two kinds of revolution that may come up. One is that a revolution of raging to overthrow and a revolution for inclusion. The latter can be diffused only if corporate South Africa aids and abets it.
Mr. Banye, final word for you.
The Progressive Professionals Forum is not looking inward, it's looking outward. We want to impact society, we want to impact the country. We want those professionals that have benefited from the African National Congress policies to come and plow back. So if you want to plow back, if you want an opportunity to plow back, Progressive Professionals Forum is your place.
Well, this has been Rights and Recourse. This program is repeated at 10 tonight, and it's also repeated at 5 in the morning on Monday morning. Please join us again next week when we bring you another discussion that will stimulate your thought. My name is Dula Mateza, and good afternoon.